All right, everybody, we are going.
Great, thank you.
Susan, sorry, one second. Highland, it looks like we're still in practice session.
Let me know
All
when
right,
to go.
let me open that up. Okay, the webinar has started. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome everyone to the February 24, 2022 Delta Stewardship Council meeting. I'm Susan Tatayan, Chair of the Council, and I'm very glad we're able to be together remotely today. Let's start with establishing a quorum. Council members. If Frank Damrell can hear us, Councilmember Damrell, let's start with you. Judge? Well, since we can see him, let's count him as here and move on to Councilmember Madueño.
Virginia Madueño here.
And Councilmember Natoli will be joining us shortly. Councilmember Smith.
Smith here.
And Councilmember Zingali.
Zingali here. Good morning.
Good morning. And Tatayan here. We have a quorum. Let's move on to agenda item 3, the consent calendar. Council members, this is an action item. Let me first check if there are any public comments on the consent calendar.
Yeah, Madam Chair, there are not.
Great, thank you, Beck. Any need for discussion or any objection to any items on the consent calendar?
I'll move to adopt.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Dan. A motion to adopt consent calendar by Council members Zingali, second by Council member Smith. Since there are no objections, the consent calendar is adopted unanimously. On to agenda item 4, the chair's report. For the chair's report.
I'm sorry, Chair Tatayan, there is a resolution, I believe, that was attached.
Oh, that's right.
And that needs to be adopted as well or voted
Yeah.
upon.
Great, thank you, Vera. Yes, Vera, could you guide me on how we proceed? Just vote to adopt the resolution, is that right?
Right, there has to be a motion to adopt the resolution,
Okay.
second, and then a vote.
Do I hear a motion?
Move to adopt the resolution.
I'll
Great,
second.
thank you. Okay, motion to adopt the resolution by Councilmember Smith and second by Councilmember Madueño. Let's take a vote, starting with Judge Damrell. Judge, can you hear us yet? Well, unfortunately, the judge we're having technical difficulties reaching the judge. I don't think he can hear us, so we'll move on to Virginia Madueño.
Vote aye.
Don Natoli.
Natoli, aye.
Christy Smith.
Smith, aye.
Daniel Zingali.
Zingali, aye.
And Tatayan, aye. The motion is adopted by a majority of the council. Well, I'm sorry that the judge can't hear us. I think our technical folks are working with him to solve the issue. Now on to agenda item 4, the chair's report. I'll start the chair's report by saying congratulations to Councilmember Smith. She's been reappointed by Assembly Member Rendon. So yay.
Thank you. Glad to get to stay.
Yes, we're glad you're staying. Thank you, Christy. And next on the chair's report, we'll have a brief update on our Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee Restoration Subcommittee by Amanda Bowl, our Special Assistant for Planning and Science. Is Amanda with us today?
Just getting her moved over, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay.
Madam Chair, I just joined. This is Maria Moroni.
Good morning, Maria.
Morning. Congratulations, Christy.
Thank you.
Great. Well, good morning. Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and good morning, council members. I'm Amanda Bowles, Special Assistant for Planning and Science at the council. And as Chair Tatayan mentioned, I'd like to take just a few minutes to update you all on a new DPIC initiative. So the draft amendment to Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan includes new ER Recommendation F in support of Core Strategy 5, improve institutional coordination to support implementation of ecosystem protection, restoration, and enhancement. And this recommendation recognizes the need and urgency for getting large-scale restoration on the ground, multi-agency efforts, and a forum for advancing this work. So the recommendation states that the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee should consider establishing an ecosystem restoration subcommittee. The subcommittee will provide increased opportunities for sharing ideas and identifying and addressing barriers to restoration while encouraging public participation in the process. Restoration is challenging work, especially considering the number of agencies that need to be involved, the funding required, and the Delta as place and equity considerations that must be kept in mind. Without a concerted effort to pull all of the pieces together, we run the risk of a much longer, cumbersome, and uncoordinated approach to restoration. And although the Chapter 4 amendment is still in process, staff and DPIC agreed that the time was right to establish the restoration subcommittee. DPIC endorsed formation of the subcommittee during its October 2021 meeting. And I do actually have a series of slides, so I don't know, Beck, if you can pull those up. I'm sorry, I just realized I was speaking without them. I will keep going until we get those up. To support the formation of the subcommittee, we're working with the Delta Conservancy and have developed a structure consisting of the primary subcommittee, as needed task forces or work groups, and a regular forum to bring all interested parties together to discuss and participate in restoration coordination. In the short term, we intend to continue working with the Delta Conservancy to support and staff this effort. And then in the long term, we plan to seek a multi-agency support for staff or a consultant to manage subcommittee efforts and initiatives. The first subcommittee meeting was held January 31st. We went into this inaugural meeting with a sketch of a subcommittee work plan to identify gaps in knowledge and restoration opportunities, integrate efforts with the Delta Landscape Scenario Planning tool, and to assess the status of other efforts to tackle barriers to restoration. So to help us better focus this work plan, the meeting agenda on the 31st had two primary areas of focus. The first was to better understand the current status of restoration in the Delta. And to this end, the subcommittee heard a presentation by Council Senior Environmental Scientist Dylan Chappell regarding the Delta Science Program's project to identify existing restoration projects and gaps in restoration, and the tools that can be used to support this research. So I think if you want to go to slide 4 is where I am right now. Great. And the second area of focus for the meeting was a facilitated online brainstorming session to help determine areas for subcommittee focus. Subcommittee members were asked 3 questions. First, what are the qualities of a restored Delta? Second, what additional restoration planning is needed? And finally, what aspects of restoration are most important for the restoration subcommittee to focus on and why? And following this session, a work group was formed to take these responses to the questions and to draft a vision statement and goals, which will be brought to the next subcommittee meeting for approval. Next slide. So moving forward, we anticipate at least quarterly and perhaps more frequent subcommittee meetings, and we're currently doing the more frequent subcommittee meetings. The second subcommittee has been scheduled for March 14th, and then the vision and goals setting work group has already met and started drafting the vision and goals. Once the subcommittee has adopted vision and goals, DPIC will be asked to endorse them, and the next DPIC meeting is March 28th. With DPIC endorsement, the subcommittee will flesh out the goals and identify objectives and actions for implementation during 2022 and 2023. Next slide, please. Oh, and that's it. So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Any questions for Amanda? Oh, Virginia.
Sorry. Good morning, Amanda.
Thank you for that update. What do you see or perceive to be perhaps maybe some obstacles to some of the work or some of the restoration that you've identified so far? Any ideas?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's restoration of the Delta. There are a lot of potential obstacles. I mean, namely right now, I see honestly staff capacity as being one of the biggest obstacles. There is an influx of funding for restoration coming into the system, but it's kind of getting all the agencies ramped up to start working so that we can figure out, we can plan and we can execute, we can, do the work that needs to be done. So I think staff capacity is a big one. I think also, making the time to come together to talk about these big issues around restoration. I mean, there's a lot going on in the system, and with drought ever more present, a lot of energy also needs to go there. And so I think finding, again, a lot of that gets back to staff capacity. And then, funding continues to be, even with funding, more money coming in for restoration, funding continues to be a challenge because restoration is expensive. So there are lots of obstacles, and but I think we had a really good turnout and great participation in our first subcommittee meeting, and there seems to be some really good and positive energy being directed toward this. So I think we're optimistic that this will hopefully help move things forward, working collaboratively with our restoration partners.
So that actually leads me to my next question, and that is, so how would you identify or define success as a result of this subcommittee work? What would you define as successful?
Yeah, I think because we're just getting the subcommittee off the ground, I think this is kind of a boring, kind of slightly bureaucratic sounding answer, but I think process right now. I think, our success is going to be very process based, and just getting us all used to working together and collaborating and partnering in this way. And really using the next few months, we are trying to really kind of move this process forward quickly and not spend a lot of time, identifying vision and goals and all that, but to really get moving on it. And so I think spending the next few months, finalizing a vision and goals, and then finalizing a work plan, and then really kind of jumping in. And I'm hopeful that, within the next few months, the work plan will be established, and I think that will be a great success. And then I think once we have those things and we have benchmarks in there, that'll determine kind of how we then define success moving forward.
Great, thank you so much.
Any other questions for Amanda? Amanda, was there any discussion at this first meeting about how this effort would mesh or work with or augment or complement other initiatives such as the Natural Resources Agency cutting the green tape, or their nature-based solutions, or the climate adaptation effort?
There was, and we had participation from Jennifer Norris, who is leading the Resource Agency's Cutting Green Tape Initiative and their biodiversity initiative. And then we also had Chad Dibble, who's really kind of the one of the CDFW leads for cutting the green tape. And I think we all recognize that there is so much work to do, that there really, and that there is a need for a venue to pull, as I mentioned, kind of all these pieces together. And I'm hoping through the kind of the goal setting and the work plan development process, we're really able to identify kind of the niche that the restoration subcommittee can fill, so that we're not being duplicative. And so I think there's just so much work that needs to be done. And the simple fact that we're trying to pull all these pieces together and to bring the folks that are really kind of at the forefront of these larger initiatives together, I think I think shows also, I think, a need for there to be some initiative like this. So yeah, definitely part of the mix, and definitely part of the work plan as we begin diving into that.
Mm-hmm. Great. And were the folks at this meeting familiar with the Delta Landscape Scenario Planning tool?
Several of them were, yeah. And so I do anticipate, we want to kind of, at the subcommittee meetings, we want them to be very action oriented, so we're moving forward. But I think there's also work for us to do to make sure we're all on the same page about understanding kind of where we are in terms of restoration. And so I do anticipate at upcoming meetings having, demonstrations of really kind of where that tool is, what is possible, and then talking about how can we augment it to make it even stronger in helping us do restoration planning.
Great. Good. Thank you. Thanks, Amanda. Well, if Are there any other council questions? Just double checking. Okay, any public comment?
Madam Chair, we have Teacher Desjardins.
Thank you, Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research, and congratulations to Christy Smith. I wanted to say, one of the things I did attend the DPIC inaugural meeting, and one of the things that really struck me is that this is one of the most valuable things I think that the Delta Stewardship Council does, is creating these kind of connections and communication channels. And the more I work on climate adaptation, the more I understand how information isn't being communicated enough, and sort of basic kinds of information. There are two suggestions I had. One was to try to more actively involve the Delta Independent Science Board members who really have a desire. The chair-elect, Lisa Wanger, actually has experience in looking at restoration planning, and has indicated, that she would jump at the chance to be involved. And I think it might be helpful to think about, I know the Delta's Independent Science Board, before they were defunded last year, had more active involvement in DPIC, and I think it would be good to think about that. I know they got an excellent report by Amanda Bull, but that's not the same as actually being able to give their perspective and their advice from all of their experience. And the other thing I suggested was, I don't know if there's the resources, but doing a network mapping of the people who are involved and who they're connected to, and also looking at the communities in the Delta that are affected by the restoration planning, because what I'm finding is that there don't seem to be good connections being made with the legacy communities, and the legacy communities are small and they don't necessarily fit into the overarching framework of environmental justice communities. But there is some research showing that it's really critical to involve the local people who are on the ground early. And the unfortunate situation with Lookout Slough is an absolute example of why this is important. And I think better connections can help avoid the kind of situation that the council was in with Lookout Slough. So anyway, those were my suggestions. And thank you so much for the effort on this. It's phenomenal.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Deirdre. And Beck, is there any other public comment?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, well, in that case, thank you, Amanda. Excellent work. And we'll move on to agenda item 5, public comment on any item not on our agenda today.
We have Teacher Desjardins.
Okay.
Yeah, I did want to bring up one issue. So your plan mentions there was an advisory group that grew out of, I think, the Delta Science Funding and Governance Initiative. And I think they advised about the science tracker. And they also advised about the science action agenda. And it really should be clear what entity created the body. And I actually was talking with our attorney, Gwen Pratt, and it's like, shouldn't this group be meeting more publicly? And, isn't there a Big League Clean Act? And I think it's a case that, if a council or DPIC created an advisory group. The advisory group's meetings and, their decisions and stuff, it's required to be transparent, and I can't even find information about exactly who's on the advisory body, and they are clearly influencing the Delta Stewardship Council directions and products. I mean, the $500,000 was invested in the science tracker, and it's still not really clear even what that project is about, and if the advisory group is directing it, we just should have more information. There was a lot of information. $500,000 was put into the monitoring enterprise review, and there was a lot of public information about that from the Independent Science Board. So we'll probably be sending you a follow-up letter. I apologize, I didn't get a chance to write something, but it's a really important process issue, and this kind of sunshine also allows public to see what's happening, what's being planned, and have input. So I really hope you'll look at this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Deirdre. Thanks for following up in writing. Any other public comments?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay. Well, let's move on to agenda item 6, Executive Officer's Report with Jessica Pearson.
Good morning, members, and thank you, Chair Tatayan. As a reminder from over the past couple of months, staff has prepared a proposal that would revise the council's appeals procedures for covered actions. The proposed revisions are designed to address lessons that we've learned while we've processed a couple of appeals now since the council's inception, and are intended to improve the process for all parties. Staff released a draft version of the proposed amendments on our website on December 10th for a 90-day public comment period, which is slated to end March 7th. Interested persons can view the proposed amendments on our website and submit comments to procedures@deltacouncil.ca.gov. I have 2 covered action updates to report. First, you will recall from my report last month that on December 30th, the Department of Water Resources submitted a certification of consistency for the remanded portions of the Lookout Slough tidal habitat restoration and flood improvement project. The public review and appeal period for that certification closed on January 31st. The council received 2 appeals, one from the Solano County Water Agency and the other from Liberty Island Access. We are now moving forward with the appeals process, and the council's statutory obligations are to conduct a hearing within 60 days of the date of the filing of the appeals, and then to make a decision on the appeals within 60 days of the hearing. So last Thursday, the hearing notice was released identifying the council meeting on March 24th, 2022 as the hearing date. We anticipate that the council will consider the determination during the April 28th, 2022 council meeting. And that meeting in April may occur remotely or in person, consistent with whatever is the guiding public meeting rules and legislation at that time. Future meeting dates and details will all be noticed through our council website and listserv. And Vera will provide ex parte communication prohibition information related to the appeals during the legal update. Second, the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency submitted a certification of consistency on January 27th for their YOLO Bypass East Levee project. The project seeks to reduce the overall flood risk to the city of West Sacramento by making modifications to segments of the YOLO Bypass East Levee. The Army Corps of Engineers proposes installing stability berms, replenishing waterside revetment, constructing maintenance roads, and improving the levee drainage system. The project's public review and appeal period will close on February 28th. The council sent out 2 comment letters since we last met. The first letter in your packet was sent to the California Department of Transportation, or Caltrans, regarding their draft 2022 California Transportation Asset Management Plan, or TAMP. The TAMP outlines the physical condition of key transportation assets throughout California and is a strategy for how to maximize related resources and manage their life cycle. The letter from the council encourages Caltrans to acknowledge the transportation assets at risk in the Delta due to sea level rise, and specifically to consider the Delta Adapts vulnerability assessment and the Delta Levees investment strategy in its analysis. The letter also encourages the department to engage with the council to consider these issues as well as equity concerns. The second letter is regarding the notice of preparation of a draft initial study mitigated negative declaration for Reclamation District 348's South McCullummy River Setback Levee project. The project seeks to improve the levees along the South McCullummy River. The letter states that the project appears to be a covered action and raises relevant Delta policies, essentially encouraging the district to engage with the council in early consultation on the project. If there are any questions about either of these letters, please let me know. Otherwise, we will continue to keep you updated as these projects proceed.
Jessica, excuse me, Bob Lloyd here with AGP Video. Sorry for interrupting. We're trying to get Frank online here, and if I could just have him unmute his microphone. Frank, I'm going to prompt you to unmute your microphone there. And if we could hear you.
Yeah.
Perfect, Frank. And you can hear okay?
Yeah, fine.
All right, excellent. Thank you for everyone. Apologize for interrupting.
No worries, that's important. Thank you. In personnel announcements, we have 3 new 2022 California Sea Grant Fellows to welcome to the council. Erin Angel joins the Planning Division. Erin is a graduate of Cal Poly University Pomona, where she received both her master's and bachelor's degree in biology, emphasizing zoology. Her thesis focused specifically on the toxic effects of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in a Louisiana salt marsh species, that's the seaside sparrow. And this research helped inform policymakers of oil contamination's longevity and the potential adverse impact to the surrounding food web. Erin will be working on various council projects, including Delta Adapts and regulatory review. Allegra LaFair joins the Delta Science Program's Adaptive Management Unit, supporting the Delta Independent Science Board. Allegra is a recent graduate of Scripps Institution of Oceanography, where she received her master's degree in marine biodiversity and conservation. Her capstone research was on an interdisciplinary project that focused on fisheries cooperatives and the benefits and services they provide to their members. Specifically, Allegra will be working to support future reviews by the Delta Independent Science Board, supporting adaptive management in the Sassoon Marsh, and helping to plan the council's 2023 Adaptive Management Forum. Birdwell joins the Delta Science Program's Collaborative Science and Peer Review Unit. Tabitha is a soon-to-be graduate of the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, where she will receive her master's in International Environmental Policy. In her program, she's focused on domestic and international science, market and policy methods for addressing ocean and coastal resource issues in the face of climate change and other human influences. Tabitha will work to support science communication and collaborative science workshops and projects. So please join me in welcoming each of our new fellows as they start their California Sea Grant Fellowship with us. The Outreach Highlights Report and active projects lists are both available in your packets and online. And if you have any questions about those, of course, let us know. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Vera Bezdacek, our counsel, for a brief legal update and announcement. Vera?
Good morning, council members. The council's administrative procedures regarding appeals require that I remind the council of the ex parte communication restriction at this meeting. The ex parte communication restriction is a requirement of California's Administrative Procedure Act and the council's appeals procedures. It prohibits any communication, direct or indirect, regarding any issue in the proceeding to the council or council members from an employee or representative of an agency that is a party, or from an interested person outside the agency without notice and opportunity for all parties to participate in the communication. What that means here is council members and council staff cannot and should not communicate about or discuss the Lookout Slough or the council's appeal proceedings with any person outside of the council. The only exception is communications regarding the administrative or procedural status of the proceedings. We have established a special email address to receive those types of communications. That email address is lookoutsloughproject@deltacouncil.ca.gov, and I will spell that out. It's LOOKOUTSLOUGHPROJECT@deltacouncil.ca.gov. I strongly recommend that if you find yourself anywhere that Lookout Slough and/or the council's appeals proceedings become a topic of conversation, please excuse yourself from the meeting immediately by explaining you are under an ex parte communication prohibition and cannot discuss or hear any extra record information about the project. If you receive a request from someone other than a council employee to discuss the Lookout Slough or the council's appeal proceedings, please decline that request and make Executive Officer Jessica Pearson and me aware of that request so that we can handle it appropriately. Any ex parte communications will be shared with the parties via our service list and will be posted to the council's Lookout Slough Restoration Project website as well. I am happy to answer any questions you may have about the ex parte communication restriction at this time.
Thank you, Vera. Any questions for her? Seeing none, I'd like to now turn to our Chief Deputy Executive Officer, Ryan Stambrough, who is here to provide us with a brief legislative update.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. And good morning, Chair Tatine and council members. Pleasure to be with you this morning. Brief legislative update. Last Friday was the bill introduction deadline. And while staff is currently evaluating the scope of bills now in print, I did want to specifically highlight one bill, which is SB 1218 this morning, which was introduced last week by Senator Melissa Hurtado, who represents the South Central Valley, which includes portions of Fresno and Bakersfield. SB 1218 specifically would require the council, in consultation with relevant agencies and the public, to publish at least annually a water supply reliability estimation for the water that flows into the Delta and out of the Carquinez Strait and into the Bay. Given that the bill was just introduced, council staff are beginning to assess the bill and its details, and will be reaching out to the author's office in the coming days for more background and potentially ongoing conversations on the measure. Another bill that I would just raise that is somewhat related in terms of was also introduced by Senator Hurtado was SB 1219. And this bill specifically would dissolve the State Water Resources Control Board and would establish a blue ribbon commission to develop a successor agency to the board by 2025. Now, both bills have to sit for a minimum of 30 days before they can be heard in their first policy committees. And that really gives us an opportunity, I anticipate, to learn more about both measures in the coming days and weeks. And certainly we plan to keep the council apprised of major developments going forward. And in closing, I would just like to thank the council's executive fellow, Chris Klyer, for his assistance on the legislative tracking front. And that concludes my update. Would be happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Are there any questions for Ryan?
I have a question. Ryan, is there any information on who might be sponsoring the legislation?
Currently, Chair, there is not. That is certainly a question that we will plan to pose to the author when we do make contact, though, and certainly we'll keep you apprised of what we learn.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Chair, at this point, before we move on into the priorities presentation, I don't know if we want to pause for public comment on the areas I've already covered in my report.
Yeah, good. Yes, good idea. Good idea, Jessica. Any public comment on agenda item 6A or 6B?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have Teacher Desjardins.
Okay.
This is Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to request, I did hear informally that there is an ex parte prohibition against Delta Stewardship Council scientists discussing the Delta Tunnel project. And I was wondering if that is indeed in place, and if so, if it's applying uniformly to all parties. You know, if there is such a prohibition, it should be, I think it should be publicly disclosed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deirdre. Let's move on then, Jessica, unless.
Sure. Yeah, just to address that, no,
Yeah.
there is no ex parte in place regarding a tunnel project currently. Okay,
Hey,
well,
Chair, may I ask just a quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Yeah, hi, Jessica, great report. I was just curious if you or Amanda had any reaction you wanted to share now or later to Deirdre's suggestion that, if I understood correctly, that DPIC and the council could do more, perhaps earlier, to engage members of the Independent Science Board, local legacy communities. I'd be interested if there's anything you'd care to say about that now, or if it's later, that's okay too.
I probably want to defer to Amanda as part of the planning committee for that effort, but you know, I'm sure that if what Deirdre is explaining about the specific experience of the particular member of the Delta Independent Science Board, then that's a great idea to invite them to share that relevant experience. I don't know if Amanda is still on the line, if she cares to speak to that.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica, and thanks, Councilmember Zingali. Yeah, we are providing regular updates to the ISB, yeah, they have expressed quite a bit of interest in the restoration subcommittee and are very open to figuring out how we can kind of partner and work with them in supporting that effort. And then your other question about the legacy communities, you know, one of the components of the restoration subcommittee is to develop kind of probably a twice yearly forum of some kind, similar to what was done a couple of years ago called the Delta Restoration Network, that really tries to bring together and provide a venue for locals to come and talk about restoration projects and ask questions. So that is one of the things we are hoping to get going again this year. And that will be a good opportunity for residents of the legacy communities to get more engaged. So we'll, as that planning continues, I'll definitely keep everyone informed of how that's coming along.
Good to hear on both points. Thank you, Amanda.
Madam Chair, just to follow on if I could.
Don, sure.
Yeah, just to your last point, Amanda, seemed to me as you look to develop that you may want to involve, Delta Protection Commission staff as well. Obviously, some of the linkages there with communities and certainly the representation on the commission. But again, I know that the commission is invited to the DPIC, but I would just suggest as you're looking at how best to approach that, and maybe it's using the format that was used previously, I would invite that, we would be, I think at the commission level, be interested as well. So to assist in that regard. Thanks.
Okay, I think we are ready to move on to 6C, which is talking about 2022 and the Delta Stewardship Council's priorities. I'm excited to present these priorities today alongside my executive team staff. As a reminder, these priorities are drawn from the council's multi-year work plan that was developed in 2019 through a series of meetings and public retreats. So we have a busy year ahead of us with much of our work in the coming months focused on completing a number of multi-year objectives that we hope will further the council's mission and provide critical support for a more resilient Delta. I'd say the themes for this year on the planning side in particular are finishing the things that we've started and advancing climate adaptation and our understanding of equity and justice issues in the Delta. We are continually working on long-term planning, but also keeping an eye on near-term needs, projects, and trends, which I think is precisely why the council was created. Initiatives such as the Delta Levees investment strategy and the ecosystem amendment in the Delta plan are set to be completed this year, while priority projects such as Delta Adapts and our environmental justice issue paper, as well as the 2022 to 2026 science action agenda are all set to make significant progress within the coming 10 months. These priorities continue our agency's focus on 3 primary objectives. 1 is to strengthen and implement the Delta plan. 2 is build capacity for our vision of one Delta, one science. And 3 is to strengthen council leadership and communications. So I now want to welcome members of our executive team to provide an overview of these priorities and objectives in the year to come, including Jeff Henderson, our Deputy Executive Officer of Planning and Performance, Louise Conrad, our Deputy Executive Officer of the Delta Science Program. But I want to begin with Special Assistant for Planning and Science, Amanda Bohl. So I'm going to hand it back over to Amanda.
Thank you, Jessica, and hello again. Just as the, grab my notes again. So as Special Assistant for Planning and Science, I get to engage in many aspects of the council's work, and I'm excited to tell you a bit about 3 distinct and important priorities. So if you want to move to the next slide, please. Great. So first, I want to start with kind of an internal focus of the agencies. Since 2020, staff has been leading an initiative focused on justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, also known as JEDI. The Delta Diversity Team was formed, which meets monthly and serves as the umbrella effort that also includes a monthly JEDI discussion group. So to support and further this work, we will be spending 2022 bringing in a series of JEDI-focused trainings, undertaking a JEDI assessment to better understand the council's JEDI climate, and the development of a JEDI strategic plan that will provide a roadmap for the agency to make any needed changes that are identified. Council staff and leadership are working together on this effort and are open to hearing how we can be a more inclusive and equity-focused agency. Next slide, please. So shifting focus a bit, I'd like to highlight the priorities of the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. In addition to the DPIC Restoration Subcommittee, which I just spoke about, DPIC will be focusing on releasing the 3rd Delta Crosscut budget and convening 3 DPIC meetings where we anticipate discussing ecosystem-based management, cross-estuary collaboration, environmental justice, and best available science. During 2022, DPIC will be meeting March 28th, July 18th, and November 7th. And just as a reminder, leading up to each DPIC meeting, Chair Diane and I meet individually with each of the DPIC agencies to hear what their current Delta priorities are and to give them an idea of what to expect during the DPIC meeting. And we find these pre-DPIC meetings incredibly useful in helping us connect with our agency partners and in shaping the DPIC agenda. And then finally, I want to highlight the environmental justice issue paper. Since I presented on this just last month, I'm not going to say too much, but we'll reiterate staff's commitment to working with our EJ expert group in helping to shape and inform the paper and the recommendations that are ultimately included in the issue paper so that we can truly be responsive to the EJ community's issues as they relate to the Delta plan. And we do intend to keep the council updated on the progress of the issue paper throughout the course of this year. And with that, I will hand it over to Jeff Henderson.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, council members. Next slide, please. So I'm Jeff Henderson, Deputy Executive Officer for Planning, and I'm happy to highlight some of the proposed 2022 priorities for the Planning and Performance Division And as Jessica mentioned, you'll find that several of these are continuations of 2021 priorities, reflecting the multi-year nature of a lot of our long-range planning activities. I'll start with the Delta Levies Investment Strategy, or DLIS. This is, as you'll recall, the council's process to implement the Reform Act charge for the council to lead a multi-agency effort that sets priorities for state investments in the Delta levy system to reduce the likelihood and consequences of levy failures. Our DLIS rulemaking was withdrawn in March of 2020 so that we could evaluate new levy condition data that we presented to the council in 2021, and the council then authorized staff to reinitiate the rulemaking process at your August meeting last year. And staff now anticipates conducting a public hearing for the rulemaking process this summer and an effective regulation date coming in January of 2023. Next, the Delta Plan Ecosystem Amendment includes recommended actions to help protect existing ecosystems, restore ecosystems, and enhance working or urban landscapes that provide habitat resources for species. The council released a draft program EIR for public review on this project in 2021 in September, and the public comment period ended in November. We're currently working on preparation of the final program EIR, which we anticipate releasing, and then conducting a public hearing on the ecosystem amendment this summer. And then if approved, a rulemaking process for the ecosystem amendment would follow. Next, the Delta Adapts Adaptation Strategy. We're continuing to develop that strategy for the Delta, detailing different tools that state, regional, and local governments can use to help communities, infrastructure, and ecosystems thrive in the face of climate change. The adaptation strategy builds upon the vulnerability assessment that the council endorsed last June. This work is supported by a stakeholder work group and several topic-specific focus groups, which will continue throughout 2022, highlighted by an update to the council in the summer. Completion of the adaptation strategy is anticipated, as Jessica mentioned earlier, in 2023. I want to also cover the covered actions appeals procedures that Jessica Pearson noted at the beginning of her executive order, or the beginning of her executive officer's report. As noted in our previous meetings, our experience with appeals proceedings over the past 5 years has shown us a number of areas where the existing procedures could be improved. The 2019 5-year review of the Delta Plan also called for a review of those procedures for possible amendments. We did release proposed revisions to the procedures for public review and comment in December, and we anticipate convening a public council workshop to review those proposed revisions and public comments received later this year. Following the workshop, staff would present the proposed revisions to the council for adoption at a subsequent meeting, again with the intention of completing that process this year in 2022. And then, as always, we are consistently tracking and meeting with proponents for covered actions, as well as implementing the council's appeals process. And in 2021, the council did receive 10 certifications of consistency. Appeals, as Jessica mentioned earlier, were submitted by 4 parties for the Lookout Slough Habitat Restoration Project when it was first presented in 2021. The council's findings on appeal remanded that covered action in part on issues related to Delta Plan policies GP1B3 and DPP2. DWR submitted a second certification for the project in December, which has been appealed by 2 parties. Those appeals are currently in process, and as noted earlier, the council's under ex parte restriction for matters related to the project and the appeals. In 2022, we expect to complete the hearing process for that, for those appeals, and to continue early consultation on a number of the projects that are identified on your active projects list each month. As well, we're anticipating completion of review of the Delta Conveyance Project Environmental Impact Report, which is anticipated to be released this summer. And that's an important preliminary step prior to the anticipated certification of the Delta Conveyance Project, which is anticipated in 2023 or 2024. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Louise to summarize some of the 2022 priorities for the Delta Science Program. Louise.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, Chair Tatayan and council members. I'm Louise Conrad, and I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Science at the Council. And you'll notice from the slide coming up soon that the Delta Science Program has a long list of goals for the coming year, all working towards our mission of providing the best possible science for water and environmental decision-making in the Delta, and also our ongoing work to support a cohesive science community for the Delta, or One Delta, One Science. And first off, we're very excited for the release of the final 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda in April of this year. This will be the culmination of 2 years of collaborative work to identify priority management needs, questions, and corresponding science actions that will reduce uncertainty in managing the Delta. The forthcoming Science Action Agenda provides 25 science actions across 6 major management needs, and will serve as a framework for guiding solicitations for research proposals and collaborative science efforts over the next 4 to 5 years. This year will also see the publication of the next edition of the State of Bay Delta Science, which, like the Science Action Agenda, is part of the Delta Science Strategy, which provides a vision for achieving this cohesive science community. The State of Bay Delta Science provides a peer-reviewed report on the current understanding of a major theme, and this year's theme is going to be the services and disservices of plants and algae in the Delta, and we anticipate publication in the fall of this year. In the area of science funding, we plan to award 6 to 8 new Delta Science Fellows, with applications due to Sea Grant on April 20th. As you may recall, the Delta Science Fellows Program is a longstanding program that's a partnership between the Delta Science Program and California Sea Grant, and it provides 2 years of research support to graduate students and postdoctoral scholars to advance applied science in the Delta. And the call for applications is again guided by the Science Action Agenda. This year, we'll see the 14th cohort of Delta Science Fellows. We will also see the long-awaited launch of the Delta Science Tracker in the first half of this year. This will be a public web-based tool to track science activities and science funding with a goal of increasing transparency in science funding and promoting collaboration. There is a large universe of science in the Delta, which can be difficult to follow, and the Delta Science Tracker will provide a way to search for and visualize the work that's underway. We also have a busy year planned for science workshops and symposia. These are public events that provide space for in-depth discussion on specific themes that have broad interest. Topics receiving attention this year include how to approach restoration in the face of a changing climate. This event already occurred earlier in February and had over 400 people registered. We will also have a series of public workshops on the issues of salinity management in the Delta, and these workshops will take place between April and October. And then later in the year, there will be a separate event on harmful algal blooms. It is worth noting here that we also are charting a course for a modeling summit, also noted on this slide, which will be a public event that will convene members of the Delta Science and modeling community to discuss a vision for a virtual modeling collaboratory. This collaboratory has been identified as a need by the Integrated Modeling Steering Committee called for by DPIC, among other groups, and will provide a platform for improved cohesion and focus for advancing the capacity for predictive modeling. And as you may already know, this is an area of needed growth in the science community to effectively support a proactive and integrated approach to managing the Delta. We have some specific work planned that aligns with our goal of advancing capacity for social sciences to support decision-making in the Delta. Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who is the Sea Grant Extension Specialist that's supported by both the Council and Sea Grant, will be launching a survey of Delta residents this summer. The goal of the Delta Resident Survey is to establish, collect, and track social data on human communities of the Delta, with a vision of becoming a repeated survey event that generates a consistent and long-term set of data. Dr. Rudnick will use an advisory committee to help oversee the effort with representation from the Delta Protection Commission, local governments, and experts in relevant fields of social science. Finally, the Delta Independent Science Board is finishing up 2 major thematic reviews on water supply reliability and the monitoring enterprise, and expects to publish their reports in the first half of this year. Board members are currently in discussion on the topics of the reviews they will undertake next, and they are considering subsidence reversal, food webs, and environmental flows. while also holding space for a review of the environmental impact report for the Delta Conveyance Project when it is released later this year. That's a long list, but I hope it does give you a sense for the breadth of our activities for the coming year. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Jessica Pearson.
Thank you. So as you can see, and as you've probably experienced over the last 12 months, we have an ambitious work plan. And it's always important for me to note that one aspect that we don't control is our regulatory workload. So that is an uncertainty that we must manage throughout the year. But I'm personally excited about bringing to a close several long-term policy initiatives that the council has invested so much of its time and effort into. And that will allow us to free up time and resources so that we can look ahead to what's next in keeping the Delta Plan relevant and being actively implemented by the DPIC agencies and others. So with that, we are here to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for Jessica or the executive team? Christy.
Not so much a question, but just a compliment. I mean, so often, you know, the best laid plans are about follow through and execution. And this presentation proves that you are all being very thorough and very deliberate in this work. And I just really appreciate it and appreciate the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we wouldn't be here without the council and previous council members' leadership in setting these priority goals. Thank you.
Virginia.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, Ryan, Louise. It was, and Amanda, thank you so much for that presentation. I want to echo Christy's comments as well. Just had a couple of follow-up questions. One specifically for, no, it wasn't Ryan, sorry.
Jeff.
Jeff, yes. Jeff, do you have like a more defined timeline with regard to the proposed revisions that we're going to be looking at for the appeals process, and what the timeline looks like for both the workshop and the public comment period for that? Are we looking towards later this spring, fall? What does that look like to you?
At this time, we haven't scheduled a date for that, for the workshop consideration and then the subsequent meetings to potentially approve the appeals procedures amendments. I think what we're planning to do is to take a look at the range of comments that we receive by the March 7th deadline, and then look at the remaining meeting calendar for the year and identify at that point the cadence for moving forward with the workshop and the potential approval. But I would anticipate that workshop occurring no later than late summer, because it is, again, our objective to complete that process this year. Great, thank you.
And Louise, just curious with regard to the survey for the Delta residents, what is the strategy moving forward in terms of trying to get as much engagement as possible from as many residents from the Delta that we can get?
Thank you for that question. The strategy is to definitely leverage the expertise and the connections within the advisory panel. And also the work will be a partnership with California State University. And there will be some help in that regard. And the plan is also to use a multimodal approach as well, so that it's accessible from different formats, from the mail to online communications. And we can provide further detail when that gets fleshed out over the coming months.
Excellent, thank you. Again, great job to all of you. It's what an aggressive plan moving forward, and so appreciate all of your diligence and leadership on this. Again, to you, Jessica, and to the entire team. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Don.
Yes, and just a quick follow on to Virginia's question and Louise's response. When you talk about the multimodal approach, and again, I don't know if the survey could encompass, a period of time where it was kind of open, but I think one of the ways to reach residents, obviously in settings where you have larger congregations there, throughout the course of the year, there are different events in the Delta that certainly attract folks from beyond the confines of those communities and the Delta itself. When I think about, certainly, and some of those have been postponed, obviously, during the pandemic. If there was a way to do that, I think just a couple of weeks ago in the Cortland community, they had their annual pasta feed. It's a fundraiser for the volunteer fire department, but it's well attended. You probably have 300 or 400 for the most part Delta residents that are there. It may not be the point in time where you would actually have to complete the survey, but it's a good way to get the word out. And I think about some of the other local festivals and gatherings throughout the year. So again, as you're looking at that, Louise, I would think that that might be a way, if you're really trying to reach folks in a setting, at least get the information to them. And it's kind of old fashioned in the sense that, having a booth or having folks on the ground at those activities, which are oftentimes fun and, designed to bring people together for a, particular, purpose and so forth. But that might be one way to do that. In fact, if you're going to engage folks from, local universities to assist, might be a way to do that over a period of time. And I think it would help, get a broader representation of folks. And so I just offer that as a suggestion. And you said you're going to be looking at that, but people get a little worn out though with just all the, up online or sending something in the mail. And so I think that might be a way to engage folks in a positive way, not, impinge upon their activities at that particular event, but, encourage them to participate and, with some understanding about why the survey is being conducted, and so I just offer that as a comment. So
I really appreciate that comment, and we would look forward to attending, being at some of those events and being with the people in the Delta. So great idea. And I will bring that back to Dr. Rudnick, and we look forward to updating you further as the effort continues. Okay,
and there's a list of, there's a calendar of different events, the Pear Fair in Isleton has a festival, but there's some, even with the marinas, they have a annual event around, some of the holiday sessions and so forth. And so again, as appropriate. So at any rate, appreciate the effort. And I think it can be one that can really give you some good solid information about what people are thinking and how they view and how they, might react to some of the things that would be in the survey. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully some more relative opening up and resuming of in-person activities can really facilitate a much more robust survey.
You're right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Don. Any other comments or questions for the executive team or Jessica? Okay.
If not, then I'm ready to turn it over to our partner agencies in the Delta in item 6D. We ready to go there next?
One second.
So I want to welcome the leaders of our two Delta sister agencies, the Delta Protection Commission and the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta Conservancy, Campbell Ingram and Eric Vink, and they are here to share with us an update on their activities and in particular also foreshadow their 2022 work plan priorities. So when we're ready, Eric and Campbell.
Hey, Jessica, this is Campbell. I'm not sure.
So you want me to start, Campbell, or would you like to?
No, not at all. I just, my system blinked out while we were shifting to panelists, so I didn't hear who was going to go first. So go ahead, Eric.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll be brief. Eric Vink here with the Delta Protection Commission, and thank you, council members, for the opportunity to give you a little bit of a briefing on what we're up to at the commission. When I last participated in this briefing, I was speaking with you about our Great Delta Trail Master Plan, which is for all intents and purposes, a strategic plan for creating the Great California Delta Trail, which as the legislature envisioned, would connect trail networks in the East Bay with trail opportunities along the Sacramento River in the cities of Sacramento and West Sacramento. Our commission did adopt that master plan. We did have great input from a number of participants along the way, including the Stewardship Council staff. And we already are initiating trail planning efforts with a couple of jurisdictions, which is very exciting. This will certainly be a long-term effort. I wouldn't, you shouldn't plan to, hike or bike through the entirety of the Delta just yet, but we have already stitched together a number of segments, and there's some real promising opportunities to continue that web further out into the heart of the Delta. So more to come on that. The other thing I wanted to update you all on is the National Heritage Area Management Plan, which we are slated to complete and bring to our commission for their consideration by the fall of this year, and then subsequent to what will hopefully be the commission's approval of the management plan, submitting it to the Secretary of Interior as mandated by the federal legislation that established our Sacramento San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. So there's a lot of ongoing planning amongst a number of different parties, beginning with a very comprehensive and talented group of advisors that is advising the work on our management plan and specific task forces. And we do appreciate the council staff's participation in those efforts as well. And then finally, I just wanted to mention, I don't often talk about prospective efforts, but this is one we're very excited about, which is a partnership with Caltrans District 10, which is the Caltrans district covering San Joaquin County. So one of 3 Caltrans districts in the Delta. And it's a project with that district that will also extend into Caltrans District 3, which is Sacramento and Yolo counties. And it will involve the installation of signage, both wayfinding signs to direct people from the interstates into features within the interior Delta, and also interpretive signs to help tell the story or help people better understand particular features once they're in those interior spaces within the Delta. So it's a very nascent effort. We're just getting it underway. It's part of the Governor's Clean California initiative, which we were very thrilled to see extended all the way to signage in the Delta, which is fantastic. And so hopefully that's something I will be able to report good progress on to you all on these future updates. And unless there are any questions, that concludes my brief report.
Any questions for Eric Fink? No. Oh, Virginia.
Eric, thank you so much. Great to see you again, and always enjoy hearing your updates and presentations. Just a quick question, and curious, with the signage, how are those going to be, and where are those going to be located? And since you're working with Caltrans, is there an opportunity to also extend that, if you will? I was actually in a meeting in Antioch yesterday and took the train, and see that there's some opportunities there too, as people are traveling to and from, that maybe there might be some opportunities to put some signage in and around the Amtrak that travels the San Joaquin corridor. Just a thought, thinking out loud right now.
I think that's a great thought, Vice Chair Medueno, and you've touched on a couple of topics. First off, we have not determined where those signs will go yet. They will largely be on Caltrans right-of-way, however. That's the intention. And so largely the focus will be on the state highways, whether it's 4, 12, or 160. I love the idea about doing some signage or some kind of interpretation that could benefit people on the Amtrak San Joaquin line. I've ridden the San Joaquin many times, but it's usually from Stockton going down the valley. I keep forgetting about that part that travels from Stockton and through Knightson and onto Antioch. That's a wonderful opportunity for people to see parts of the Delta. I'm not sure what that would look like, but it's got me intrigued, and we'll certainly start thinking about it.
Excellent. Something more to add to your already full plate.
Thanks for the great idea, though. It's
Absolutely.
got my wheel spinning about it, even if it's, you know, some kind of travel log that people can listen to as they're traveling through, which for that matter could apply to the Capitol Corridor as it barrels through the Sassoon Marsh area. So
Absolutely. You
yeah.
bet.
Any other questions or comments for Eric? Okay. Thanks, Eric.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Campbell.
Campbell.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from the east coast of Florida this morning, so made an unscheduled trip, and so my lighting's all funny and I'm a little bit casual, but it's good to be here with you all today. Chair Tatian and council members. Just give you a quick update on what we're up to. I want to talk a little bit about our Proposition 1 grant program. You'll recall that was a total of $50 million for ecosystem restoration in the Delta. We've finalizing the 5th solicitation that should about spend down the rest of our remaining funds in that program. And we have 8 full proposals that we're reviewing right now. Currently, we're doing external review of those proposals with the expectation that we will take recommendations for funding to our board at our May board meeting. For our Proposition 68 grant program, the Community and Economic Enhancement Program, we continue to approve projects and very excited about some of the projects that we're moving forward, and anticipate that 3 more projects under that program will be coming to our board at the March meeting just here in a few weeks. So that program continues to move forward. Really want to tell you all about the Delta Drought Response Program, which is a program that we just recently initiated. This is in partnership with the Delta community, Department of Water Resources, and the Delta Water Master. And the program is intended to pay Delta farmers for practices that reduce their consumptive water use during times of drought. We're offering them $900 per enrolled acre. We're seeing lots of activity around planting less water consumptive crops, changing crop rotations and things that do conserve water. The intent here really is to help us learn and better understand how do we manage drought in the Delta, what are the practices that are most effective, and how do we invest if this drought persists and or for future droughts. It's been a really interesting program. It's been great to work with everybody in developing the program, and it has really taken off. We've received 81 proposals to date. We have funded 23, or we've approved 23 projects. We're in the process of executing grants for those projects. That is about 6,500 acres that will be enrolled in the program. We're right at about $6 million right now. We have about 8 million in total to put out in projects, and the estimated water conserved here is about 17,000 acre feet. So the purpose of I should have put this in the very beginning, but the purpose of the program really is to allow this water to remain in Delta for environmental purposes and for water quality purposes in the Delta. And so that 17,000 acre feet is what we hope to be able to demonstrate is left in the system, and then provides the benefits that we're seeking. We meet again as a selection panel on Friday, and I anticipate that we will probably approve enough projects at that time to completely utilize all of the funding for the program. And so at that point, we will let all the applicants know that we are oversubscribed, and we will continue to work to execute the grant agreements. Just a little bit more information. I mean, the expectation is that we will be using OpenET, which is a remote sensing program that will allow us to really quantify the comparison between baseline and how much water is actually conserved with each of these practices. So that will give us a better sense of which practices are the most effective and the best way to invest in the future. And then we will also have a contract with UC Davis to place about 6 eddy covariance towers throughout the Delta. And these are pretty amazing instruments that can really allow for a better understanding of the flux in and out of evapotranspiration as well as carbon. So that will help us calibrate the OpenET program. So I think I will leave it at that and see if there are any questions.
John.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Campbell. And again, I know as you've been reviewing proposals, obviously been working with the chair and the vice chair of the Conservancy. So I've had a chance to see the summaries of those. I guess the question I had with you potentially reaching oversubscription by the end of this week, and I think with the questionable weather patterns and obviously implications of ongoing drought, is there any chance that with proposals that would merit potential engagement still early in the season, that there could be some other money made available? Has there been any outreach to those that might provide that funding? And again, because if the conservation is as you stated, and obviously there's an awareness, obviously members of this council and others about the approach here, and if there's a need to conserve further, and it could occur, but I know it's seasonal because folks are either going to irrigate less or fallow in some cases, change crops and so forth. So I guess my question is that is there potential for some additional funding, assuming you got proposals that would meet the criteria? And again, I want to thank the review panel. Madam Chair, I tell you, they've been fast and furious looking through the applications over the last couple of weeks. I know Campbell, again, working through the chair and the vice chair, has been sending updates about every 3 days and assembling with the water master and others. And so I appreciate the review. But my question is there potential for some additional funding before we get much further in the season, or is it once it's exhausted, that's it?
Yeah, well, certainly want to appreciate your work too. You've been jumping in there and approving proposals as needed, which we greatly appreciate. It has been a whirlwind. I think the ability to move any additional funding for this year is challenging. It's always challenging to move state funding sources. There have been initial discussions about what funding sources might be available for next year. And ideally, we would be able to start the program much earlier next year as well. This year, it was just it was a challenge to get a state grant program up and running in the best possible time to meet the needs. I guess that just gives me one more opening. One thing I did want to add in the presentation, this has been fantastic in terms of reaching out and really getting to know Delta farmers and work with them. I think I've talked to more Delta farmers in the last 2 months than I have in the last 11 years. And so I think in that regard, it's just been an excellent opportunity to really build partnership with the agricultural community and better understand their needs.
Just one other comment, and I know that as you've been in this whirlwind, once you've funded proposals and get a chance to catch your breath, I think it would be good to publish in some fashion. Because I mentioned this to you about the mapping, the geography, and the types of project. They're all obviously it's in the public domain, so people can go to that. But some summary, and then obviously the results are going to be what folks are looking to. But I think so. Members of this council and certainly other interested parties, folks that follow the Conservancy as well as commission activities, I think that would be useful as kind of the foundation by which then you're going to measure and judge and hopefully have additional funding cycles in the years to come, assuming that is successful. So
absolutely, I mean our intention really is to have totally open and transparent data because that helps the farmers and the agricultural community as well as the state as well as just a really good overview and summary of exactly what was learned and how that will guide future programs. There was a program back in the early 90s that was similar, and one of the challenges is that the institutional memory of that program has been lost. So we want to try to make sure that we can preserve it in a way that it persists.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Certainly. Any other questions or comments?
I just want to express my appreciation to Campbell and Eric. Feel like we're really good partners and we've got great communication going. We meet quarterly, but we interact certainly more than that. And I can't express my appreciation enough for those relationships, especially during the last 2 years of remote work.
Absolutely. Thank you all.
Thanks, Campbell.
So now I want to just look ahead briefly at today's remainder of the agenda. We will be hearing from staff at the Department of Water Resources who are exploring the effect of various waterside habitats on native fish species. So this exploration is important because it may provide critical information on the best practices for improving waterside habitat along setback levees, which would advance Delta Plan Policy ERP4. It also tests some current hypotheses about how species use certain habitats in the Delta, and it does so using some pretty innovative new technology. So with that, I conclude my executive officer's report.
Great, thank you, Jessica. I'd like to pause for a moment before we move on to agenda item 7 and say that we have a phenomenal team, and our executive team and staff are some of the best in the business I've worked with. And these priorities that we were presented with, the retreats that we had, there was a lot of work, and the public was there with us in establishing those priorities. And these priorities are not, go in, get it done, and move out. These priorities are actions that will last for quite some time, and in my opinion, make a big difference in how the Delta is managed. And our leadership team, it's unfortunate that they don't get to report at every meeting. It's not that this work occurs from meeting to meeting. I've witnessed that they wake up thinking about this. They're creative, they're brainstorming, they include their staff and each of these endeavors at a level that is unusual in many organizations. So I just want to take a moment to recognize Jessica and Ryan and Amanda and Jeff and Louise and all of the staff who put so much heart and soul in what the council does. So thank you.
Thank you.
So speaking of a leader who puts her heart and soul into what she does and even goes to bed at midnight with her 4-year-old son with all of this on her mind, let's move on to agenda item 7, Dr. Laurel Larson.
Sorry, Madam Chair, we do have a public comment.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, thank you, Beck.
Diane Desjardins.
Thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to comment about council communications. I do greatly appreciate the leadership team efforts, and I think it's wonderful that you have a direct communications with the Delta Protection Commission and the Delta Conservancy. I just wanted to flag, I'm noticing there's some gaps in communication with the Delta Independent Science Board. And I'm going to start trying to provide some transcript, so it's clear. But I think it might be good to consider having them directly report. One of the things that came up at the last meeting of the Delta Independent Science Board was the chair asked for a written response to their comments on the science action agenda. And also at the January meeting, the chair-elect, Lisa Wanger, did comment that there was concern that their written comments were coming late and that they wouldn't be folded in. There was also a request, I believe, to see how the lead scientist did say she was going to revise the science action agenda and particularly the introduction. I don't know if there's going to be substantive reductions, but I think it would be good if it wasn't just sent to the printer, but the Independent Science Board could actually see it, at least if there's intention to incorporate the Independent Science Board's comments. And I think it's really important. Independent review is part of best available science, according to the Stewardship Council's definition. And you need to have accurate representation of whether the Delta Independent Science Board's comments were addressed and incorporated. And it's really hard to do that if they don't even get to see the revisions that are made in response to their comments and there's no written response. So I will be providing transcripts because I don't think there should be an area where there's miscommunications. And it wasn't brought up, but it's an example. And I hope this will we can have better more accurate communications in the future, because the Independent Science Board is by statute a completely independent board, although it's administered by the Stewardship Council. And so I hope it can be treated that way and with similar respect as is given to the Protection Commission and the Delta Conservancy. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Deirdre. Do I see a hand or no, I guess judges. No, I do not see a hand. Well, let's move on to agenda item 7, Dr. Laurel Larson.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan, and good morning, council members. Beck, if I could get the slide now, that would be great. So today I'm going to continue my mini series of profiling the work of the 2018 class of Delta Science Fellows, with this installment featuring 2 previous fellows who both worked on the role of wetlands in regulating greenhouse gases. Now, before I go into the details, I do want to contextualize this set of research spotlights by reminding you of the presentation that you heard several council meetings ago about the potential use of Delta for deep carbon sequestration as one option in a portfolio to help California achieve carbon neutrality. Now, that presentation referred to the transport of carbon dioxide via pipelines to the Delta, where it could be injected deep into the bedrock. But there is another way that the Delta could potentially become a sink for carbon, effectively removing it from the atmosphere. So wetlands, such as those found in the Delta, can be hotspots for carbon sequestration at the surface. Plants take up carbon through photosynthesis and convert it into biomass. When those plants die and decay, some of the carbon is re-emitted to the atmosphere by microbes, but much of it can become incorporated into the soil, particularly if the soil is kept wetted and oxygen is scarce. Organic carbon-rich soil created in this way is called peat. There's now a lot of interest in funding wetland restoration through a statewide or national carbon market in which a certain number of carbon credits would be assigned for a certain acreage and type of wetland that is restored. Figuring out how many carbon credits should be assigned, however, requires a better understanding and more precise quantification of the rate at which Delta wetlands remove carbon from the atmosphere for this long-term storage. Now, one of the spotlighted fellows on the right side of this slide, Matthew Bogard from the University of Washington, made these types of measurements for a wetland in the Sassoon Marsh using sensors that measure gaseous carbon dioxide transport and also sensors that measure the transport of dissolved carbon away from their wetlands by flowing water. So in particular, Matthew's team was interested in quantifying how much of the net carbon taken up by plants is lost from the wetland via this lateral transport by flowing water, which is a term that's not typically quantified in wetland carbon balance studies and is poorly understood in general. They ended up finding that 41% of the net carbon uptake by plants is lost laterally in this way, with the remaining 59% incorporated into the peat. Now, this 41% lateral loss might sound like an inefficiency in the use of wetlands as engines for carbon sequestration, but Matthew's results suggested that this actually isn't the case. They found that 91% of this lateral loss is in the form of dissolved inorganic carbon, most of which is known to be transported directly to the ocean, where it remains stored for millennia without being released back to the atmosphere. Right now, the ocean is taking up massive amounts of the carbon dioxide, of the excess carbon dioxide that we're putting into the atmosphere. So thus, this carbon may effectively be considered sequestered as well over the timescales that we're interested in, which is a good thing for the climate. Now, the second spotlighted fellow on the left side is Tyler Anthony of UC Berkeley, and he worked to understand the role of former wetlands, now drained and used for agriculture, in greenhouse gas cycles. So remember how I said that peat needs wet, oxygen-scarce conditions to form? Well, when peat is drained and oxygen enters the soil, the organic matter contained within the soil becomes easy fuel for microbes, which convert the solid carbon to gaseous CO2 through their respiration, which pretty much is the same as what happens in our own bodies. The loss of organic material in this way is the same process that causes soil subsidence and results in these lands presently making the delta a large source of greenhouse gases. Now, one way to slow subsidence and carbon dioxide emissions is to return water to the fields during the winter when the land is not actively being used to grow crops. However, this flooding in the wintertime can result in other microbial byproducts of respiration that does not require oxygen. These byproducts, which may include methane or nitrous oxide, are even more potent greenhouse gases than carbon dioxide, with a longer lifetime in the atmosphere. So one relevant question here is whether these practices can be managed differently to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions. For example, if the application of fertilizers rich in nitrogen, which is the N in N2O, is contributing to nitrous oxide emissions during winter flooding, then perhaps the timing or the amount of fertilization could be changed to minimize those emissions. Tyler and his team used sensors to directly measure emissions of methane and nitrous oxide during winter flooding of drained delta peatlands. And they found that actually nitrous oxide was not substantially impacted by fertilizer application, but rather by the flooding itself. So they found that several weeks of flooding combined with warmer soil temperatures greater than about 50 degrees Fahrenheit contributed to the highest emissions, which does suggest that the timing and duration of this managed flooding could be strategically altered in order to reduce emissions. Now, taking a step back, both of these studies are important because as California does move towards a carbon neutral future, it is important to properly account for the effects of agriculture or environmental management actions on our region's greenhouse gas footprint. By quantifying these effects, we could also modify practices such as agricultural flooding practices to make agricultural parts of the landscape less of a carbon source. Meanwhile, we need more studies like Matthew Bogard's to synthesize knowledge of how different types of delta wetlands contribute to carbon sequestration. And just as a preview, one such synthesis is coming later this year in the 2022 State of Bay Delta Science Report, which we hope to release in December. So with that, I'll close this research spotlight and pause to see if there are any questions on this research before I move into a discussion of Delta Science program activities.
Sure.
Oh, Don.
Yeah, not a question, but I'm going to pay you a very high compliment, Dr. Larson, you and the fellows here. Each month when we get these reports on the different scientific, the work in the field, both by folks that are doing it, it just makes me want to go back to school and take science. I mean, it was never my forte. I'll just say that. Maybe the political science piece was, but not the. And again, just the practical application and the way it's laid out here and you explain, and certainly as it relates to the Delta and to environment, the broader environmental aspects, but certainly very relevant to, daily life and goings on in the Delta, some of it dating back for millions of years, potentially. I find it very fascinating. I just want to say that, it makes me want to read and learn more, which I obviously could do, but you've made it very understandable. I thank your fellows in this case, but each month, the folks that do the work and the research and how you boil it down and present it, I think really has a practical aspect to it. And hopefully others that tune into us beyond those that are just tuned in on science will find this useful, because I think it helps really relate our daily activities and how we can change activities, maybe only slightly, but have a positive effect on our environment. And certainly as we talk about global warming and some of the aspects of sea level rise and, loss of some of the habitat and, the impact on critters and other living things, including ourselves. Again, I want to thank you, because again, I find it fascinating and really again, a highlight amongst many highlights that we have each month, but you make it so understandable. So thanks to Matthew and to Tyler and to all the folks who've contributed so many ways. It really is very useful, and I think it's going to contribute to some positive work in the future. So thanks.
Thank you so much for that comment. And I'll just echo that, whenever I learn about what our Delta Science Fellows are doing out there in the field, I just feel really hopeful and very inspired. And they're all doing fantastic work. So it's been a pleasure to profile some of that work here.
Thanks for your leadership as well. So you're part of this picture. So anyway, thanks, Madam Chair.
I have a question.
Sure.
Thank you. So I was wondering, carbon sequestration is something that, is really in the forefront of a lot of discussions right now. And I'm wondering, is there any grants or any projects that can run some kind of a pilot program? Maybe there is, maybe it's, if there's not, some kind of a pilot program to show, kind of like become the poster child of this whole concept that can be promoted. I'm wondering if there is, and if there is not, are there ways to go to that direction to make that happen?
So that's a great question. Thank you for the question. I would need to check sources for which grants are currently active, but I will say that Twitchell Island in the Delta has been funded as a research site for a trial application of these wetland management practices to promote carbon sequestration. And that dates back to the CalFed era. So there's been a tremendous amount that we've learned about how to maximize carbon sequestration based on that long-term Twitchell Island experiment. I believe there are many funding opportunities available currently to run additional pilot scale adaptive management experiments on how we can optimally sequester carbon in wetlands and through other technologies. I just can't speak to those specific opportunities off the top of my head.
Sure, it's important. I think as the stewards of the Delta, if we could at some point through the students or science programs, do a pilot program that then we can showcase in, because kind of like showing the way statewide even of things that can be done and put that in, kind of the map of the issues. I mean, there's a lot of discussions right now about all these different things, right? The hydrogen and this and green hydrogen and the reducing carbon footprint and all that. And I think the least amount of knowledge, information, and promotion is done around carbon sequestration. And a part of it is because maybe the science yet is not as advanced, maybe, or politically, it has not been something that has been put on the forefront of everybody's agenda. So I think we have a good chance if the funds are available or can find the funds to go to that route, to do a pilot program that can be showcased.
Mhm. And I actually think DPIC is well poised to do this with their emphasis on nature-based solutions. So that is a role that the council can help play.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you both for the questions. Any others before I move on? I'm just kind of scrolling through the gallery here. Okay, well, I will move on then into Delta Science program activities, starting with an update on the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda. And as you know, the public review period for the Science Action Agenda closed in late January. I'm happy to report that over a dozen comment letters were submitted, including one from the Delta Independent Science Board alluded to by Diane Desjardins. Many of the comments highlighted the need to better connect the prioritized science actions to relevant legislation, regulations, and existing efforts, and suggested some minor revisions to the science actions themselves. Other comments focused on the need to allude more specifically to water supply reliability related science needs and to better package the science actions into an overall science vision. We've implemented many changes in response to these comments. Just one example is a rewritten forward that highlights how all of the science actions fall into a theme of integration across agencies and interest groups for the production of science, integration of our existing understanding of individual species or variables like water quality to understand how the estuary functions as a whole, and integration across different data sets, models, and experiments. At this point, staff have nearly completed their revisions of the Science Action Agenda in response to the comments received, and we are preparing to send the document off for formatting and accessibility. We anticipate presenting the final Science Action Agenda to the Council for endorsement at your April 2022 meeting, and we're very excited to do so. I have a quick update on the Delta Science Fellows Program. As a reminder, our Delta Science Fellows request for applications, which is administered in partnership with the California Sea Grant, is active. In this call, we're soliciting the 13th class of Delta Science Fellows, which spans master's students through postdoctoral scholars for the 2022 to 2024 academic years. One important deadline that's coming up is February 28th, when all interested applicants must file a notice of intent to apply. Please do help us continue, please do continue to help us spread the word about this opportunity to fund early career research for physical, biological, and social scientists in our community. Please also help us to recruit community mentors to match with our student applicants. Community mentors are practitioners in the use of science for management or policy in the Delta. Interested persons can get in touch with either myself or with Lauren Hastings and let us know that you are willing to serve as a community mentor. We're going to be doing some work behind the scenes to match up these community mentors with interested applicants. Final applications will be due on April 20th of 2022. I have a brief report today for you on our Adapting Restoration for a Changing Climate Symposium. This was a 2-day symposium that explored the short and long-term climate change considerations of current restoration projects in the San Francisco Bay Delta and elsewhere. And it took place on February 2nd through 3rd. I'm very excited to report that we had 423 unique participants. This is one of our highest workshop participation numbers. And it demonstrates the high degree of interest in this topic. The workshop consisted of presentations and very stimulating panel discussions. It showcased creative strategies for restoring flooded islands through the use of floating wetlands, for example, highlighted lessons learned from horizontal levees, and emphasized the importance of cross-watershed and cross-estuary coordination and of helping resident communities cultivate a connection to nature. Featured speakers included government, academic, tribal, and private sector scientists, policymakers, and even an artist. There was a lot of positive visioning of the future, which left participants feeling really inspired and hopeful. Products of the workshop are pending, and next month's packet will contain a more detailed report out. So the next workshop on the horizon is the Interagency Ecological Program Workshop, which will be held virtually on March 22nd through 24th with a free sign up available online. The Interagency Ecological Program, or IEP workshop, is an informal event that's held each spring for sharing new research results that advance science important to IEP in the larger Delta science community. This year's planning committee has chosen to emphasize early career scientists and managers within our community. The planning committee is looking forward to discussions led by and for those with newer roles in our ranks, and hosting poster sessions, lightning talks, and even a poetry slam. Another item on your radar is the Delta Governance Brown Bag Webinar Series. This is a 3-part Brown Bag webinar series hosted by the Delta Science Program with a focus on Delta governance. Dates for the upcoming webinars are March 1st, April 13th, and May 5th. And the topics are environmental governance, collaborative governance, and adaptive governance, respectively. Each webinar will feature a panel of speakers and a set of questions posed to the panelists. The panelists are selected to represent a wide range of perspectives from federal, state, local, and tribal government, collaborative partnerships between government and non-government entities, and academic social scientists. The upcoming March 1st webinar will feature your very own council member, Don Natoli. Thank you, Don, for agreeing to be a panelist, as well as Carl Wilcox from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Mark LaBelle from UC Davis, and Kaylee Allen from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I have seen a preview of the questions, and I'm personally really excited about what is shaping up to be a riveting discussion. The Delta Lead Scientist Ask Me Anything series also resumes next week on Monday at noon with an episode focused on the upcoming launch of the Delta Science Tracker, which I will report to the council on in an upcoming Lead Scientist report. Just briefly, the Delta Science Tracker is a searchable database of all funded research that concerns the Delta. It provides visualization tools and readily available information about which projects are addressing which science actions or priorities, which investigators are tackling common or complementary topics, and what products are resulting from the investment of research dollars. Maggie Chrisman from the Delta Science Program and Clint Alexander from ESSA Technologies will be joining me as co-hosts of this episode. And just as a reminder, recordings of previous Ask Me Anything sessions, including January's, which focused on the science program's ongoing synthesis efforts, are available on the council's Instagram TV. So I'll move to the final section of my report, which is the by the numbers section. And I don't know about all of you, but we literally had a few drops of rain at my house in East Sacramento on Tuesday. It wasn't even enough to wet the whole street. Although we all heard about a bit of snow in the mountains, the numbers that I have for you today in this report still aren't that pretty. The Northern Sierra has received 93% of cumulative average precipitation to February 22nd, and 93% might sound okay, but the water stored in the snowpack is only 62% of average, thanks to the warm weather that we experienced earlier in the month, which allowed for melting of a substantial amount of what fell earlier this season. In the Central Sierra, precipitation amount is at about 81% of the cumulative average to date, but snow water equivalent is actually a bit higher than in the Northern Sierra at about 70% of average to February 22nd. Not surprisingly, not too much has changed in our reservoirs since the last report, which are at 53 to 77% of their average storage for this time of year. And stream flows continue to remain very low, 38% of average in the Sacramento River and 21% of average in the San Joaquin River at the measurement stations we typically report. Flow at the Central Valley Project and State Water Project intakes is at 1/3 of the historical average for this time of year. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any further questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Any other questions or comments for Dr. Larson? Okay. Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item?
Yes, Madam Chair. We have Teacher Desjardins.
Okay.
Thank you. Deirdre Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to say that a really important paper came out, published by Scripps Institute, and with Mike Dettinger was a co-author, and it found that they looked at a change in evapotranspiration, and they have found that there's been a major increase across the West. It's about 50 millimeters in California. It's up to 250 millimeters in the Southwest. 50 millimeters is about a 3.4 inch increase in evapotranspiration. So they found it occurred since 1981. So there's already, due to increased temperatures, a major increase in evapotranspiration. So the same amount of precipitation is resulting in less runoff. And there's similar research. I also wanted to say that with respect to the science action agenda, I hope that there will be some transparency about who's on the advisory committee and what their role was in shaping the science action agenda. It is largely a collaborative project. And as we know, there are various groups in the Delta. I use the concept of tribal bias or in-group bias, but each of the groups has a particular kind of bias. And so it's helpful to know different kinds of collaboration will produce different kinds of collaborative projects depending upon the groups that are guiding it. And similarly, the membership of the groups that participated in the panels in the workshops for the science action agenda would be helpful. I do know that a lot of the fishing advocacy groups were very involved in fighting the Trump administration rollbacks in 2021 and in emergency drought actions to protect fish, and did not have time to participate. So thank you.
Thank you. And I will say that the final science action agenda does contain a detailed discussion of the process, and also in the appendix has a summary of comments that we received and who provided them, as well as general information about how they were addressed.
Any other public comment?
No, Madam Chair.
Great, thank you. In that case, thank you, Dr. Larson.
Thank you.
Let's move on to agenda item 8, Department of Water Resources Setback Levy Monitoring Pilot Project. And Jessica Pearson, our executive officer, will kick it off.
Thank you, Chair Tatayan. I'm actually going to hand it over to Jeff Henderson, who will introduce our guest.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. It's a pleasure to see you again, council members, and to introduce this item on the Department of Water Resources Setback Levy Monitoring Pilot Project. As you know, the vast majority of the historical Delta ecosystem has been transformed due to human activities. And the council's been tasked with, in part, restoring the Delta ecosystem, including its fisheries and wildlife, as the heart of a healthy estuary and wetland ecosystem within the Reform Act. And as a result of that, the Delta Plan includes numerous ecosystem restoration policies that work to achieve this goal. One of those policies, policy ERP4, states that covered actions that are levy projects must evaluate and, where feasible, incorporate alternatives, including the use of setback levies, to increase floodplains and riparian habitats. So multi-benefit projects that increase habitat are critical to supporting native wildlife and a sustainable ecosystem. And it's important for us over time to understand how well setback levy projects work in accomplishing the goals, in accomplishing the ecosystem goals that we're set about to achieve. But it's not enough to build habitat projects if the habitat we build doesn't support native species. So to develop a better understanding of restoration best practices, we do need to revisit the sites that have been restored to see how native species are using these spaces. Our guest today is here to discuss an ongoing pilot project that is working to build our understanding on how to do this. Randy Mager is a senior environmental scientist at DWR who works in the Delta Ecosystem Enhancement section within the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives. He has worked to establish waterside levee habitat on setback levees through the Delta Levees program, in addition to other Delta habitat enhancement projects, including Delta aquatic monitoring and the management of Mines Landing in Sassoon Marsh. He received his PhD from UC Davis in 1996, conducting research in the reproductive biology and establishing capture, culture, spawning, and rearing techniques of Delta smelt. Randy's here today to talk about some new monitoring techniques that enable scientists to effectively monitor fish use in complicated habitats, such as vegetated intertidal marsh, steep riprap levee slopes, and constructed waterside levee habitat. And this information could help to enhance our understanding of effective habitat restoration practices and could inform future restoration efforts, as well as our ongoing implementation of ERP4. So with that, I'd like to welcome Randy to make his presentation to the council. Thank you.
Hey, okay, sorry, I had to figure out how to unmute myself, sorry. We're a Teams organization, not Zoom, so yeah. Anyway, thank you for that introduction. You saved me a lot of talking right there, so I'll move right on into it. Is the presentation up? Ah, there we are. Okay, excellent. Yes, I want to talk today about the aquatic monitoring program that we are utilizing with some of the setback levees that have been constructed under the Delta Levees program as part of now the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives at DWR. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so currently, or in the past, fish sampling in the Delta was by two ways, basically through tow net surveys, a net pulled behind a boat at specified places for specific times, or by people walking along the beach or along the shallow water. Tows varied by location, time of year, like the fall midwater trawl at Kodiak Spring, or a spring Kodiak trawl, whether you're using one boat, two boats. They're generally oblique tows going through a column, a water column. And for channel edges, we typically use beach seining, where a couple of people and waders go out into the water and bring a net up onto the beach. And then you scoop up the fish, count them, measure them, see what kind of species they are, etc. So that works great for the mid channel or along nice sandy beaches or muddy flats. But the problem is, if you get out of the next slide, please. That's not what we're doing, really. You can't sample this kind of stuff that way. In the Delta, most of our restoration, rehabilitation, enhancement efforts are to create much more complicated environments that really don't lend themselves to pulling a net through. Intertidal marsh or levee waterside habitat is shallow, full of vegetation, and way too complicated to pull a net through, either by hand or by boat. And the channel edges that we're not busy restoring or trying to be busy restoring, they're often too steep and armored with rock that just doesn't work for beach seining. Either fish will disappear into the crevices or the staff will break an ankle on the rock. Other techniques such as electrofishing don't work in the fast moving waters of the Delta. Other netting techniques, Lampara nets, etc., could be utilized, but they're associated with mortal take. I mean, you scoop a fish into a net, they usually die. And getting take permits with ESA listed species is difficult. Cameras for monitoring, it's a turbid environment, even if the Delta smelt would like it more turbid. So you really can't see. Sonar is kind of useful, but it's got a very narrow window. So really, we have not been able in the past to monitor fish in either areas that are most detrimental to the fish or to those areas that we're spending a great deal of money and effort to restore until recently. If we could show the next slide. The aquatic habitat sampling platform was recently developed by Kramer Fish Sciences and the Bureau of Reclamation. It's a 22-foot shallow draft, highly maneuverable pontoon boat with a forward mounted net rather than pulling the net behind. The net opening is controlled by a hydraulic lift and has wheels to enable it to roll along the bottom. As you can see on the top right, the net narrows between the pontoons, goes through the live box that has high definition video, and then the fish exit out the back, along with any vegetation or other debris that would normally either damage the net, fish, technician, or both, or all. So the fish pass through the imaging box unharmed, but the high resolution video is time-stamped and recorded so that we can go back to the lab and review these videos. Concurrently, location of the boat and water quality, temperature, dissolved oxygen, salinity, pH, turbidity, chlorophyll A, etc., are constantly recorded and timestamped. And so really for the first time ever, we can actually see what kind and how many fish are in a particular area and in what kind of water. It's unprecedented. If you can show the next slide, please. And the fish aren't handled, data is preserved. To the left there is the imaging box between the pontoons that the fish go through. And here are some of the images that you'll see. And the laser was used at one time to measure the fish so we can see how big they were. There is now stereoscopic GoPros that software handles that. Usually in the past, these videos have been analyzed by a couple technicians. It's really good for identifying the fish. Now there's actually software being developed by Kramer Fish Sciences to do some good identification. So some poor young technicians not bored silly. So this platform now gives us a quantifiable view of fish in place, time, and condition. Again, unheard of. Next slide. Coupled with this is environmental DNA. And some of you may have heard of it. Some haven't. It's a fairly new and evolving science. 4 years ago, I never heard of it. 3 years ago, I was in an international symposium with hundreds of people. And what it allows you to do is identify fish species and fish community by detecting their DNA in the water. So, like I said, the science is evolving rapidly, and the number of agencies, companies, and universities that are utilizing these techniques is growing quite rapidly. So water is basically pumped through a glass filter, as you can see in the middle there, and then stored and taken to the lab where the DNA is isolated. And then using techniques I don't understand, they use DNA barcoding, uses genetic markers to identify the species.
And you can either work to identify one particular species across many samples, or you can do what's called meta barcoding, where you're basically looking at who's out there and identifying the fish that are in a particular area. And this is great for looking at the community at large, the fish assemblage at large in a particular area. So these two technologies that really just came forward 4 years ago, 3 years ago, are available and just greatly increase our ability for fish monitoring. So how are we using them? Next slide. Everybody here knows how drastically the Delta's been changed. So I'm not going to get into that. Next slide. But along with Stewardship Council, DWR has been mandated through AB 360 and various water codes that the Delta Levies program during the improvement of flood protection in the Delta, the levees, that we have to have net habitat improvement, including aquatic, as part of any flood protection. So we have projects such as Decker Island, the recently completed Dutch Slough Tidal Restoration Project, and a number of levees that have been set back. And to date, there's about 85 million, $75 million invested, and there's more on the books, and we're putting out another PSP. So we're looking at about $200 million on levee improvements that will have or will include setback levees with waterside habitat. And in general, the levees are set back to deal with stability issues and to improve flood protection. And when you move a levee back into a subsided island rather than onto a floodplain, it gets more expensive. So nobody does this lightly. But the interesting thing is, once you move the levee back, you're left with the remnant levee, the levee that used to be the effective levee. And we can actually degrade that, lower its elevation, and create any number of different kinds of habitat. And over the last 30 years, there have been a number of different designs. Next slide, please. Twitchell Island was the first. It was done in the 90s. It's along the San Joaquin River, down by Sherman Island. It's located actually on the outside of a bend. It's subject to high westerly winds, and it's right next to the ship channel. So it got a lot of erosion and a lot of underwater steep banks. And so the levee was moved back about 85 feet, created, and then the remnant levee was cut down, planted with riparian vegetation. The rock armor was left in place, but some back channels were created with emergent vegetation that's tidally inundated as fish habitat. But how well it worked, we didn't really know for a long time. Sherman Island, next slide. This was another stability issue. When you start seeing cracks in levees, you get worried. And so they wanted to move it back anywhere from 20 to 70, 80 feet back and use engineered material rather than a peat core, which many of these levees have. And this was a different design. It has a long slope, intertidal marsh, and was planted accordingly, and floods twice a day. And the levee slope itself is soil covered rock, and again is also planted. A very different design. Next slide, please. Bethel Island just was completed in 19 and 21. There's two different projects on Horseshoe Bend and Taylor Slough. These were created with widened the land side of the levee and then cut benches, 10 to 15 foot wide benches in there that were set at an intertidal level. So they flood again twice a day. But the underwater slope is rocked as well as the levee slope. Next slide. And we have other designs coming up on New Hope, again, just like Sherman, with a long 80-foot intertidal sloped bench. There's other ones that are planting riparian benches that are above mean high water. So various designs in various locations. Next slide, please. So the question is, what works? We don't know. What locations work best? Should they be on the San Joaquin or the Sacramento, the McCulmy, Old Middle Rivers? Who knows? Should it be vegetated, or should it be rock or soil? What do the fish interact with better? How steep should the slopes be? Types of vegetation, whether it should be SAVs, emergent, scrub, riparian. Again, we don't know. And in terms of scale, should it be short little habitats scattered along the river, or is it better to have one big continuous habitat that the fish, especially salmonids, could be in for a long period? Again, we just don't know, and we've had no way to find out until now. And the tech, like I said, it's just become available. And so here's our chance. So if you can, next slide, please. In 2019, DWR contracted with AECOM and Kramer Fish Sciences to look at their technologies and if it would work. Can the sampling platform work along the rocky levees in the Delta? eDNA was working fine in small lakes, small ponds, small streams with a unidirectional flow. But given the dynamic action in the Delta, can you detect DNA? When you've got the tide coming in, the river flowing down, and a freighter coming by. Good question. Short answer, spoiler alert, it was yes. So in 2020, we continued to contract with Kramer Fish Sciences and to continue monitoring, and more importantly, to develop a model to determine those characteristics and attributes that benefit the native fish the best. And we needed to do it through different regions, because as we know, the Delta is very different in different places. We also expanded this into the Dutch Slough tidal restoration area. We just finished a sort of before action. We had the channels in there, but it wasn't connected to the Delta, and did some fish sampling and nutrient sampling, trying to get an idea of what the nutrient cycling was like. And then we just recently breached, and so now you have full tidal flow going in and out, and we'll be starting more monitoring there. Next slide. All right. As I said, the Delta waters and conditions vary widely depending on where you are. And we have to not only take that into account, we also have to be able to measure it. And we are, in this case, we're just looking at tule perch and a couple different kinds of habitat. Here is riprap with no veg and riprap with SAV underwater. And the difference between Sherman Island and Twitchell Island, which is all about seven miles apart. And there is a distinct difference, an increase of fish in the tule perch in the riprap with no veg and the riprap with submerged aquatic vegetation versus Twitchell. And so, and this is just 1 year. We need multiple years to really build this model out, but it just shows that we can detect this difference within the same kind of habitat, but in different water. It makes sense, but again, we need to get a handle on the effects. Next slide. One of the advantages of the sampling platform is continually taking water samples and water quality, and so we can look at the difference of these areas. And this just kind of shows a scatter plot of data where between Twitchell Island and Mayberry Slough. So Twitchell Island, it's warmer, it's more productive. Mayberry Slough, it's more turbid, higher total dissolved solids. How that correlates with fish responses to the different attributes,
That's within and between regions. That's going to be needing more analysis, of course. But I just wanted to show that, okay, this data is readily available and as part of the model building. One of the good news with these techniques is they develop a great deal of data. The bad news is you have a great deal of data to analyze, but the folks at Kramer are doing it, so it's great. Next slide, please. This is just to illustrate the various attributes that are being tested on the right and the regions that we're sampling on the left. The regions were dictated by where we have some setback levees and some waterside habitat. And actually, in the case of the upper right, DHI, which is Dead Horse Island, is just across the way from a future project, McCormick Williamson. So we're finally getting pre-project fish data on a restoration project. That's kind of unheard of. But so again, developing this model will help inform the designers and managers, one, where to locate projects beyond just where the RDs need to fix their levees, and what attributes do we need to pay attention to and to design into the levees. All right, next slide. Actually, you can, next slide, please. All right, yeah, we're basically just surveying the same attributes in different regions. Again, what I was just talking about. So next slide. Now, not all, oh, back one. Okay, oh. Heck, leave it there, leave it there. I was just basically, the other previous slide was just to indicate that not all the sites have all the attributes that we want. That's just the nature of the delta and our budget. So it's there we are. One of the things is that we are constrained with the platform to sample just between late April and midsummer, and that's because of take restrictions on delta smelt. Even though the fish pass easily through the nets and are not apparently impinged or harmed, nonetheless, it is officially considered take and it's considered as part of our take permits. The good news about eDNA collection is all you're doing is taking water samples. So we don't have that restriction, but we also don't get the quantification that the platform provides. So each technique gives different kinds of data and is used separately. But onto this slide, this just shows some preliminary results from 2020, looking at types of attributes and regional differences. First one is, if you look into open water, that has the lowest catch per unit effort, which is basically just the number of fish per volume of water. It's, the number of fish you catch. And which is interesting. So most of the fish are on the edge rather than in the mid-water, which is kind of interesting when a lot of our policy and practices of the Delta are driven by open water and mid-channel surveys. So just something to keep thinking about. We found that non-rip-wrapped banks have greater catches than rip-wrap banks. Most fish biologists breathe a sigh of relief on that one. When there's vegetation, you have greater catches than non-vegetated. And although we do have on Twitch Island in the riprap no vegetation, a blip, quite a good catch, whether that's constant there or not, will take a few more years of data. Again, this is just preliminary data. Some other observations that we got from eDNA was the Twitchell back channel had the highest species richness that we've seen. Whether you're open channel, edge, vegetated edge, whatever, in those back channels, it was great. And the centrochorids are highest near shore and in habitat associated with riprap and vegetation. So again, for fish biologists, that's not unusual. Next slide. In the pilot study, we wanted to see if you could detect DNA in the waters. And so he actually put some anchovies in a live car and then took samples down flow from that and developed a lot of mathematical models, which they ended up publishing. And basically it looks like about 100 meters down flow, you can detect appreciably what species are out there. So that was good to know. Next slide. Again, this just indicates differences in region and also in habitat. I mean, we saw had a higher detection of salmonids, or Chinook salmon actually, in the back channels of Twitchell at this particular time. It'll be interesting to look at data a week later if that signal was further down at Sherman Lake or something. Not sure yet. We're still crunching the numbers, but just want to present this. Next slide. This is what meta barcoding will help show. This is just a list of the species that were detected, 36 species detected by Kramer Fish Sciences or genetics. The black boxes are native, the white boxes are non-native. We also detected muskrat, the various mammals. This is phylogenetically organized, just because we're all fish nerds here, but it is just a real good view of what we can see from eDNA analysis. Next slide, please. All right, this is another one from meta barcoding that shows the fish community assemblage, and very powerful. We clearly see that largemouth bass can be found in the open water and riprap areas. The open water makes sense considering, remember, if anybody remembers the midwater trawl, it used to be for striped bass evaluation way back when, before we started dealing with ESA listed species. So, this correlates with what most fishermen and fish biologists will tell you. The largemouth bass we're seeing in the back channel areas and in the vegetation. Again, most fishermen and fish biologists will tell you that. So it's nice that the eDNA detection gives us a view of the community assemblage that makes sense to what we mostly know. In terms of the gray bars, or their other species, they account for like 16 other different species. We just didn't list them here. It's useful to know that yes, eDNA, we can detect it. We can get a community assemblage at a particular area for a particular time that actually makes sense. So the next steps, or if the next slide too, please, which talks about the next steps. We're going to be continuing collecting the data in 22 and 23. We have funding through March of 24. Analyze the data, do statistical analysis, MANOVA and GLM, and a few other different things. Looking at building this model to define what levy attributes have the greatest difference and impact on fish species and numbers that we are concerned with. And because if we're going to go spend the money on these setback levies and then the extra 10 or 15% that it costs to do the habitat on the water side, it behooves us to use our money wisely and to build these the way that it would be most effective. So this model should help considerably, and I think that's about my time. People want to hear about Dutch Slough. I've got a little bit there, but otherwise, I'm happy to take some questions.
Any questions from council members? Virginia, and then Dawn.
Thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate it. And there's no question, your passion and knowledge of the world of fish is pretty profound. And so I really appreciated that. Curious, you said that you're going to continue to collect data through 2023. Is that when funding will continue to fund this project till 2023?
Yeah, we have funding through March of 24. So we'll be, again, the platform is constrained. So right now, in terms of take permits until midsummer, and then we have to stop sampling then. We can continue collecting water samples for eDNA analysis anytime. But the analysis, again, we're collecting so much great data. Unfortunately, it takes a great deal of time to analyze all that, especially trying to build up this model. So yeah, right now the funding lasts till through 23 and a couple more months to finish reporting and stuff like that.
Great. So Randy, is this the first of its kind? I mean, in terms of the study, and do you anticipate that there will be more of these kinds of studies?
I sure hope. I know Kramer did some, I mean, this boat is brand new. I mean, this boat didn't exist 5 years ago. And then, like I said, Kramer and the Bureau put it together. And in fact, actually, they're busy building another one. And so it's a very unique platform. And we've never had this kind of data available before. And the same with eDNA. I mean, 5 years ago, that was cat of the hat magic stuff. And it's getting better and better and better, really minute by minute. The number of publications coming out of it and out of this field are just amazing. So ideally, yes, it's one of the reasons I want to, present this to you is there's so many different habitats that this is appropriate for. DWR is building 8,000 acres of intertidal marsh. How well is that working? How can we do it? We've got all these levees happening. We've got, I would love to get this up at Liberty Island. I mean, back in the late 90s, we were out there with, regular boats and nets and having a hard time sampling that area. So, yeah, we have great opportunity to utilize these new technologies. I mean, it's capabilities that we just didn't have. It's the same way like with drones. I mean, we're just now starting to figure out, we can do veg transects with drones really easy. And it's just a real exciting time to be monitoring habitat.
Great. Thank you so much. Again, I so appreciate your enthusiasm and just love of your expertise and background. So thanks, Randy. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that. But the expertise really lays with, the people like at Kramer Fish Sciences and stuff. I mean, it's fun but challenging hiring people that are way smarter than you are, and it makes for a steep learning curve for me. But it's great.
Any other questions? Oh, Don,
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, again, I would echo Virginia's thanks, Randy. I'm curious towards the back portion of your presentation, you had the one slide, I have a hard copy that showed the 2020 Chinook week 2 eDNA, and then the second slide following that, you had that bar chart that showed, the Chinook in the mix and the various, habitats that you listed there. And so, how do you get a sense about the number? And again, obviously different runs of the salmon. And do you time it so when the run is optimal, or just you're doing the sampling? Again, I'm just trying to get some understanding. Maybe thread that together for me so I could understand. The chart that showed, I guess, where Chinook, where some concentrations of them, if I took that chart, slide right, and then, but in the bigger mix, it's minuscule on the one and barely makes the line on another one. And, there's a little bit of a red line on BC3 there. So could you just explain about it, particularly as it relates to the salmon, but also then how that factors into the overall numbers? Because this is just a bar chart. I don't know if that's thousands or millions or hundreds or, fish that are being, measured.
Right. And that's the tricky part with eDNA. And it gives you a detection and a relative abundance. The actual numbers, that's where something like the platform actually comes in handy, because you can count how many fish are going past the camera and how much water you're sampling. And so you can get a much better quantification. The DNA detection is more of a quantifiable or a qualitative measure.
Okay.
Now, in the terms of that one that you were talking about at first, where you should have the nice colorful circles in there.
Yes.
That would be what we call qPCR, where we're actually looking for specific animals. So you've got a water sample, you've isolated the DNA, and now you're looking for, is there any Chinook salmon out there? Okay. And so you're specifically looking for one particular fish. And so we have a higher detection up there at the back channels of Twitchell versus further down, like in near the whale's mouth of Sherman Island.
Sure.
Oh, and by the way, excuse me, as an aside, there's a lot more subsidence reversal projects going out on Sherman Island also for the carbon sequestration. Not doing quite the intensive research that was being done for Twitchell, but as a project, there's actually hundreds and hundreds of acres being done out there. So now then with that bar graph, that was meta bar coding. So you actually take a water sample from a certain environment, like, okay, rip-wrapped areas. And you're basically seeing, okay, who's out there? Who's in the neighborhood? And we got the largest signal from striped bass. So again, it's not a quantifiable number, but it's like in this particular area, that's who's there. And in terms of, yes, in the second or the third bar and the second one from the right, yes, you have salmon detected, not that much. In relation to all the other fish that are out there. Now, whether that was because of that particular run in May 2020, it probably had already passed. This is where you get into further analysis of what that water year was, when the runs were moving. There's, again, so many variables, and it's why we're doing this for 4 years. And these graphs and illustrations are really just to illustrate the capabilities and what we're aiming for. It's not, the analysis has not been completed, and there's still a lot to learn and to discern.
Right. No, I gathered. Yeah, I gathered that. I was going to say you're probably going to need a fleet of boats if you're going to, be able to measure, certainly, and do it on a basis where you could capture, because just moving around in the Delta with all the movement of water, certainly seasonality, all the other factors that come into play, having even one or two boats will give you more information than if you didn't have it at all. And obviously, it sounds like the technology is coming together pretty quickly for the additional data gathering and then the analysis. But just thinking about the waterways, and I know some of those areas on the land side, and just again, those are distances, and if you're going to do a run that then calculates the different habitats and so forth, you're going to be in that be in a location for I imagine for a couple of days anyway. And so it sounds like you're gonna have another boat out there on the water, though. Next season, you said this year?
No idea. Yeah, I just know that it's in process and it's in progress. So yeah, I'm not part of that. So
yeah.
yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask you, are you able to detect delta smell. Obviously, there's, certainly a significant concern about, that potential, species might even, be near, if not extinct. And so and you can do that. So this, you can get very small creatures in.
Oh, yeah. In fact, Osmeridae, I'm not sure if it was longfin or delta smelt were detected as part of this, the 36 or 39 species.
Oh, the other?
Detected.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Now, exactly where and when it was, I don't know. Again, I don't have the list of
No,
all
I
the-
know. Yeah, I didn't want to get too much detail.
But
you've
yes,
gone through
no, you
mine.
can detect it. And, again, our previous efforts were generally coordinating with the platform and the eDNA collection. And that was constrained to actually avoid delta smelt. And so, as the eDNA analysis and collection become better and better, which, like I said, it's happening minute by minute. I think we'll be taking water samples more often in interesting places. One of the interesting things too will be looking at fish behavior during the daytime or nighttime. I mean, the diurnal cycle. Do fish come into a habitat and use it during the night or during the day? What time? Dawn, dusk. We don't know about that, and that's going to affect how we design intertidal marshes. And you could put an automatic sampler out there to take water samples every hour for a 24-hour period and go back to the lab and analyze it, see who's using it. The possibilities are pretty.
So you don't necessarily need to have the boat in that case, because you're able to use this the other the static technology. Oh, that's interesting.
And as a senior scientist, I can tell you those midnight samplings, they get old real fast.
For you or for the fish?
For the technician.
Yeah,
I like being a senior scientist.
Okay. Thank you very much, man. I appreciate your presentation. It was very interesting, and sounds like we're making some advancements that are going to help us, design habitat and see what merits of this, but also help us know how we're doing once it's in place. So again, I appreciate your work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from council members? So Randy, I have to say, this is really exciting. It's so much in just 5 years. The idea that this boat did not exist 5 years ago, this technology is amazing. I remember in the late 90s, certain leaders in water asking, how in the heck do we know where the fish are? Where are they now? Especially since it affects the operations of the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project. And I imagine this will inform the locations of many setback levies. So, on that note, is anyone thinking about documenting the difficulty of creating a setback levy once you've determined through this work the kinds of setback levies that you would prefer for the purpose of fish? Setback levies, they may be expensive, but in the long run, they provide so many more benefits than dumping a bunch of rock on a levee. So I was just wondering, how long do you think it'll take before this informs preferred type of setback levy, the kind that we should prioritize?
Well, actually, about a month ago, there was a setback levy design, and they were wanting to put it above mean high water, and we chatted and said, well, we're finding a lot of fish along the edge, and if you just lower that slope a little bit, it'll probably be more effective. I mean, at this stage, it was kind of our best guess in terms of preliminary data, but they did it.
at least in the design. I mean, we still have to build the dang thing, but you know, it already has helped inform. But you know, it's going to take a while. But you know, Twitch Island was put in what, in the 90s, and that's what, 90s, 10, 20, 30 years ago. So yeah, the stuff moves slow. But again, you know, the setback levies are located generally right now where the reclamation districts feel that they need to put a levy down for flood protection. And we just kind of, you know, capitalize on the fact that somebody's moved a levy back, and now that there is some extra dirt laying around there and some room, and we can actually move this, you know, have some remnant levies scooped out and dealt with. So, you know, in terms of location, a long time. In terms of design, like I said, about a month ago. And it'll just get better and better as we go. Right. Yeah, this is really valuable work, and it'll also inform the benefit cost analyses. Once you can start counting the benefits to the fish and other wildlife, include that in the BC ratio for these setback levies to demonstrate that not only you're providing benefits, you're also avoiding costs. So yeah. Well, the next batch of levies, the PSP that's coming up for Delta Levies program, is basically going to be weighted for, you know, development of waterside habitat to be included. Fantastic. So, great news. Yeah. Well, if there are no other public comments, I mean, council comments or questions, is there any public comment?
There is. We have Diane Desjardins.
Yeah, Diane Desjardins with California Water Research. And I just wanted to say that I do have some concerns about Kramer Fish Sciences as a partner with a state agency, because Brad Cavallo, who's I think he's president or co-president of Kramer Fish Sciences, has been very active in testimony against the biological opinions to protect fish. And, you know, I think this is very valuable research, and there's a lot of good information being collected, but I would like to see a more neutral party involved in aggregating and synthesizing it, because, you know, I think this restoration and evaluation of habitat is incredibly important, but it shouldn't be used as a way to subsidize research that can be used to undermine implementation of needed Endangered Species Act protections for fish that we know are very critically endangered because of climate change and regime shift in the Delta. So thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Yeah, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I know Brad for 25 odd years. You know, he must have been presenting some kind of data that evidently, you know, you disagree with. I found them to be very capable, competent, and innovative scientists. Yeah, you know, I imagine, I cannot say for sure, but I also know Kramer Fish Sciences, and in fact worked with them when I was with the Nature Conservancy, and they are very rigorous scientists. So I can't imagine that Brad was speaking against the environmental, whether it was federal or state ESA. I imagine that he was presenting data that showed perhaps some of the limitations in how the ESA, I don't know, measures take or can only speculate, but I can't imagine that anyone from Kramer Fish Sciences would be speaking against the ESA. Perhaps just presenting data that would offer some science that would better inform ESA and better inform whatever take limits or reasonable and prudent actions might help fish species and their habitat.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. These guys are seriously data driven. So yeah, the other side of that too is, you know, plain simple fact is they're the ones that came up with this really cool boat. You know, nobody else has come up with it. So, you know, they come up with the best hammer. I'm going to use it. But again, it's, if there's testimony that you didn't necessarily agree with, I would have to look at the data, and I can guarantee that they've looked at it harder than I ever have. So.
Any other public comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have Gilbert Cosio.
Good morning, Gil.
Good morning, Chair Tatayan. Thanks for allowing me to speak publicly here. I have a question for Randy, kind of based on the question that Mr. Natoli was talking about, and then a kind of a response to Chair Tatayan's question about you know, how will this benefit and encourage setback levies? So first, the question for Randy. And Randy, you know, I've heard and seen your presentation many times, but this is the first time I've seen so much extensive numbers and results, and boy, they are pretty exciting. And I did latch on to that 39 species slide that did indicate you did have eDNA hits for Delta smelt. So the question is eDNA technology to the point where the scientists that are monitoring the Delta smelt that don't seem to be able to find any in traditional monitoring, are they accepting this as something that will help them in their research?
Boy, I don't know. You know, this stuff's just starting to get published and put out. I mean, you know, like I said, this is all real preliminary stuff. I mean, I didn't even have this for you, what was it, a month or two ago? We talked to Delhack. So, you know, I would certainly think so. And I know DWR has its own set of eDNA collection now and analysis. Of course, UC Davis does too. So yeah, there's plenty of people working on it. You know, in terms of the Delta smelt, yeah, I would certainly hope so. And any encouragement you all can give to somebody, you know, we're just working our little world here myself, but yeah, it's, you know, and the other thing too is we've got like 56 known species in aquatic species in the Delta. We detected 39 of them. You know, the question is, are we just not detecting them in those particular water samples, those particular regions, or are the markers not very good? And there's new markers being developed, again, minute by minute, to enable us to look at samples and find another new species. And the nice thing about the eDNA is the DNA is preserved. I mean, what you don't use for your particular run, stick in, I guess, liquid nitrogen or freeze it, I don't know, but it is there for future analysis. So if later on people figure out a way to detect, I don't know, certain algae or zooplankton, you can go back into time and see what's going on. I mean, wouldn't we like to know when certain algae came into the Delta? It'd be fantastic. So in 20 years, yeah, we'll be able to go back in time and look. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question very well, but.
Are there any other public comments?
No, Madam Chair, they're not.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Randy, for taking time to make the presentation today. Exciting work.
Well, thank you. Really appreciate you letting me have the time. Thank you very much.
Jeff or Jessica, anything else on this item? Nope. Okay. Well, in that case, we'll move on to agenda item 9, preparation for the next council meeting. The next council meeting will be March 24 and 25, again via Zoom. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care and see you next time.
See ya.
Thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Susan.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Take care. Good job, everybody. Thanks.